Good to see you all this morning. So glad to be here, and it's great to be back and see all of you again, and try to remember names and faces and putting all that stuff back together. We are going through this series that's talking about leadership, and it's one, I guess, this month that's been coordinated between the sermon, what we've been talking about in here, and then also what the kids have been doing over in junior church, right? What they've been learning about. So we all have been this month learning about the same thing. And I hope that those of you who are parents, I hope you're taking this opportunity because we're all studying the same thing. I hope you're taking this opportunity to have some discussions with your kids about the Bible, to have some discussions with your children about some of the characteristics of godly leadership that we've seen this month in the lives of people like Deborah. I think Jimmy talked about Deborah and Gideon, right? And Samson. Man, what an opportunity, right, to talk to your kids about those kind of things. Well, today we're actually kind of closing out this series, and we're going to look at a leader. We're going to look at a woman named Ruth. And I'm sure as Jimmy talked about some of those other people who were judges, he explained the cycle that the Israelites have been going through, right? Anybody remember this cycle? He talked about the cycle that Israel has been going through. What did they do? They continued to fall into the worship of false gods. And when they started worshiping false gods, what would the true God do? What would Yahweh do? Anybody remember? Yeah, he would actually allow them then to be overrun by the people around them. He'd allow foreign people to come in and to invade them and to oppress them. And so after a time of slavery and oppression and occupation, the people decided that they needed to repent and they needed to return to God, and so they would do that. And then God would raise up among them a leader. We called them judges, right? He would raise up a leader among them, and what would the leader do? Mostly the leader would be a warrior. Mostly the leader would come and he would lead the Israelites in battle. He or she would lead the Israelites in battle against these foreigners, but he would also bring along with them this period of revival in the land, this period of revival among the Lord's people. Now, one of the things about these revivals is they would only last as long as the lifetime of the leader, because as soon as that leader died, as soon as that judge died, what would the people do? They would return to the worship of false gods. And where would that lead Israel? They'd find themselves in trouble again, wouldn't they? So that's that cycle that's up there. As the book of Judges comes to a close, there's this line. It's like the last verse of the line of Judges. And I think it's interesting because the author of Judges has used that line before, right? He's used the line before. We read it back in chapter 17. He tells of this guy who builds this shrine. He builds a silver idol. Probably it's an idol to Yahweh, but you're not supposed to do that, right? But so he builds the shrine. He builds a silver idol to put in there. And we read the line. The line is, in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Well, the author uses that line again at the very end of the book of Judges, right? The last line, Judges 21:25. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Well, that line in our Bibles then leads us to this next book. It leads us right in to the book of Ruth. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, it says, hey, the story that you're about to read, these details that you're about to read, all of this happens during the time of the judges. So when is this happening? It means it's happening somewhere between all of those national ups and downs, right? The book of Ruth is happening sometime during all of the back and forth between the worship of the true God and the worship of false gods. This is when, it's during that time period, is when we are introduced to the plight of a woman named Naomi. I challenge you to read through the entire book. It's only 4 chapters. I challenge you to read through the entire book of Ruth. I'm not going to do that this morning just because, of time, but I challenge you to do it. I'm going to be summarizing a lot of it this morning. But here's what's going on. Naomi and her family decide what? They decide they gotta move. The reason why they have to move is, anybody remember why they have to move? Huh? Yeah, they have to move because there's a famine in Israel, right? There's no food in Israel. So it's got to be one of those periods when Israel's being disobedient, because what did God promise Israel back then? Hey, you follow me, what will I do? I'll give to you, and I'll give it in abundance, right? I will bless you. So it's got to be during one of those times of disobedience, because God's not blessing, because there's a famine. So Naomi and her family, they move from their home in Bethlehem, right? And remember, it's a little town, right? Oh, little town of... Anyway, all right, so they move from their town in Bethlehem in the tribe of Judah, and they move to the country of Moab. Now, throughout history, when you see people groups relocating, the reasons a lot of times is very simple. They move to where the food is, right? So they move to Moab where the food is. Now, there's an issue with Moab because Moab is not a good place for an Israelite to be, because the Moabites are seen as being enemies of Israel. The Moabites, the Ammonites, they're cousins of the Israelites through Lot. But they're enemies because of the way they treated Israel during all the desert wanderings. So this is not a good place for them to be. And so you have that. Upon moving to Moab, Naomi's problems just compound. Anybody know why her problems get worse? Yep. Okay, so her problems compound because they move there. First of all, there's food there, but not a good place for an Israelite to be. Then her husband dies. And you're like, well, at least she has her boys, right? At least she has her 2 sons, right? Yeah. Her 2 sons end up marrying Moabite women, and we kind of can take from the story they were probably married about 10 years, maybe, somewhere around there. But another thing is, do they have any kids? Nope, no kids. And her sons die. So these 3 ladies are what? In a world of hurt, aren't they? These 3 ladies are in trouble. So during this time, apparently, Israel gets its act together because why? Because the famine's over. And Naomi makes a decision. I got to go home. She decides she's going to return back to Bethlehem, and she loves both of her daughters-in-law very dearly. Both of those daughters-in-law love her very dearly, very deeply. Yet only one of those ladies ends up being an example for us. Only one of them. They all love each other, but only one of them shows the character of a leader, a character of someone who can lead other people, and that is Ruth. She shows the virtue of a person that God can use to lead other people. The first thing we see about Ruth is Ruth does the right thing, no matter the cost. Say that with me. Ruth does the right thing, no matter the cost. When each woman weighed the options, the other daughter-in-law is Orpah, okay? So it's Ruth and Orpah. Though it saddened Orpah, what did she choose? I mean, it broke her heart, but what did she choose? Yeah, she chose I guess, what she thought was the better future, right? She chose to stay in Moab. She chose to find a new family. She chose to return to her people, get a new husband, right? But it's Ruth who commits herself to staying with Naomi. It's Ruth who forsakes Moab. It's Ruth who knows, what's going to happen to Naomi by herself? Right? So it's Ruth who knows that Naomi is helpless, and so she sacrifices. She actually chooses to stay with Naomi. She refuses to let her go off by herself. She doesn't know what the future holds for her. She doesn't know what the future holds for Naomi, but she knows that she cannot abandon her mother-in-law. So it's Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, where we get that well-known declaration of Ruth. Anybody remember that declaration? Right? It says this, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. And may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." What's she saying? What's she saying? It's you and me, right? It's you and me to the end. So then they both return back to Bethlehem. And we see Ruth's example. And we have to ask ourselves, man, would we be willing to do that? Are we people who are willing to do the right thing no matter the cost? Is that who we are? Are we willing to do the right thing, the godly thing, the righteous thing, the holy thing, no matter what is being required of me? Because that's Ruth's example. A lot of times what we do is we justify our actions, right? Right? Based on whether this thing is going to benefit us in the long run or not. If it's going to work out to my advantage or not. And we justify our actions by that. But are we willing to do the right thing no matter what it costs us? Because God wants us to do what is right, not what is beneficial. Orpah loved Naomi, but when it came down to it, she wanted an easier life than following a widow into a foreign country. But Ruth knew that Naomi didn't have anyone but her, and she decided to sacrifice her future to do the right thing by Naomi. So these two women go back to Bethlehem, and they get there, and the people of Bethlehem seem really excited to see Naomi. But it's in these verses when they return that we actually get to see Naomi's heart condition, right? And I'll just let you know, she's not in a good place, right? Naomi's name actually means pleasant. And because of all the things that she had gone through, because she actually didn't believe that her life was ever going to be good again, she tells the women of the town, "Do not call me Naomi. Do not call me pleasant." Anybody remember what she wanted to be called? Mara, which means bitter. Do you see where her heart is? Do you see where she is? She's broken. Life has beaten her down. And I'm not sure if you've ever been in that position. Anybody ever felt that way? I don't know if you've ever been in that position. I don't know if you've ever felt hopeless before. I don't know if you've ever been truly depressed. Not just having a bad day, but like truly depressed. Have you ever been in a situation where you couldn't see the way out? And it's during those times that we need someone else. to come alongside us and to be strong for us, right? It's during those times we need somebody to come alongside us and to be strong for us. And that's what Ruth does for Naomi. She decides not just to be with Naomi in her hardship, she chooses to be the person to step up and to provide. So what does she do? Number 2 about Ruth is she's willing to be strong for those who are weak. She's willing to be strong for those who are weak. Say that with me. She's willing to be strong for those who are weak. Ruth does when Naomi can't. We read chapter 2. She goes out and she attempts to provide for her and her mother-in-law. She goes out and she goes to the fields to glean. Now, back then, farmers were commanded under the law of Moses to actually leave a part of their fields unharvested so that the poor could come in and harvest crop for themselves. Okay, so that's what's going on when we talk about gleaning. And it wasn't a handout, by the way, because what did the poor still have to do? They still had to go in and harvest the crops. So those who were hungry had an opportunity to eat, but they had to themselves go into the field, harvest the grain on their own. And this is what Ruth is doing. She's actually out there. She's willing to work. She's willing to put herself at risk, not just for her own needs, but to meet the needs of Naomi. And she's not looking for a handout. She's willing to work. I was thinking about this and I thought, are we willing to do that? Not to sound cliche, but are we willing to give people a hand up instead of a hand out? And what's the difference between those two things? A hand out meets the need just in the moment, right? A hand up meets the need, but also gives that person a sense of accomplishment. It restores self-worth. It empowers those people who are powerless. Are we willing to give others a hand up? Because it's while Ruth is out there and she's gleaning in the fields that she meets a man, right? Anybody know his name? Yeah, she meets Boaz. And when she meets Boaz, Ruth and Naomi's lives are about to change. Boaz is related to Naomi's dead husband, and he's already heard about Ruth. He's already heard about this woman's character. He's already heard about how she chose to stay with Naomi, and now he observes her, and now what is he observing her doing? Working, right? To provide, gleaning in order to supply. And because Boaz not only feels, I think, compassion for these two women, but he also recognizes Ruth's character. As I read these chapters, one of the things I came to understand is Boaz respects Ruth, doesn't he? He actually respects her for what she's done and what she's doing. And so he makes it so that Ruth is not only supplied for, that Naomi is not only supplied for, but that the women are protected from harm too. And then you get into chapter 4, and you see the third thing about Ruth. Ruth is bold enough to pursue a solution. Say that with me. Ruth is bold enough to pursue a solution. Now, the solution is pretty unconventional, right? Ruth and Naomi's way of pursuing a solution was for Ruth to get all dressed up, for her to get all smelling good, right? And then she goes out and basically proposes to Boaz. It's kind of weird, especially in their culture. But what does he do? What does she do? She goes, he's been working all day long. He's eaten. He's sleepy. He goes and lays down next to some grain piles. And while he's sleeping, she goes and lays at his feet. Now, some have conjectured that there was some hanky-panky going on. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's the way it went down. The reason being is chapter 3, verse 11, Boaz says, everybody knows that Ruth is a woman of noble character, right? So I don't think there was hanky-panky going on or anything like that. And also, that phrase, a woman of noble character, is identical to the phrase that's used in Proverbs 31, right? When it talks about a woman of noble character. We can see the way that Boaz handles himself. Boaz is a righteous man. And he wouldn't do anything inappropriate here because he's not the first one in line to marry Ruth. You read it and you go, he's both flattered and surprised that she wants to marry him, right? To paraphrase what he says, there's got to be younger and richer guys out there, right? So what does he do? The next day he goes out, he makes sure that all the legalities are straightened out. There's another relative who has first option to take over Naomi's property and everything that belongs to Naomi's husband. But after this other guy finds out that a Moabite woman is a part of the deal, what does he do? Not interested, thanks. So we see Boaz buys the land that belongs to Naomi's husband. He becomes the head of that family, and he marries Ruth. And they have a son. And now Naomi has a descendant to carry on their family. Pretty happy ending, right? The story ends with a happy ending, doesn't it? So, as we kind of close, here's something I want you to see. In this story, we see all of the things we talked about, but we also today, we see that amazing character of Ruth, that amazing leadership of Ruth. She did the right thing no matter what. She was strong when others were weak. She was bold enough to pursue a solution. She not only helped to provide for herself and Naomi, but here's something else. Her life helped to further God's plan. And here's what I'm talking about. In the details of her life, God was doing something. God was furthering His plan. Do you remember the line from Judges? What was it? Did I put it up there again? I did, didn't I? In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Believe it or not, the book of Ruth actually leads to God's solution to that statement. And here's how. Boaz and Ruth have a son. His name is Obed. Naomi takes Obed, raises him as her child. Ruth chapter 4, 16 and 17 says, Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So the book of Ruth, here's the amazing thing about this. It's not just a book, it's not just a story about the hardship and the deliverance of a woman named Naomi. It's not just about a Moabite named Ruth who comes to the rescue by marrying a man named Boaz. That is the story, but there's so much more to this story. It's about God working out His plan in the details of these people's lives, right? And it's not only David, but what line is this? Anybody know what line this is, what people group this is? This line leads us to Jesus. God used a woman of noble character named Ruth to bring about, first of all, the greatest king of Israel, but also to bring about the Messiah. And so my final question for you today is, are you going to submit yourself to God and allow Him to work in the details of your life? Are you going to submit, and are you going to allow God to work in the details of your life? Because He wants to. Do you realize that? He wants to use you to lead other people to Him. And God can use anyone. Today, we saw God using a Moabite, someone that Israel considered to be their enemy, but God used a Moabite in order to accomplish His will. And when we are in our sin, what are we to God? We are enemies to God, right? But Jesus made it so that we can be forgiven. Jesus made it so that we can be indwelled with the Holy Spirit of God. He made it so that we can become people who work for God to expand God's kingdom here on earth. That's what He wants for you. Are you going to make that decision today? Are you going to submit yourself to the Lord today? If you want to make a decision, you come forward as we all stand up together today and as we sing.